Good afternoon. Welcome to Decarbonising Heat here in the first afternoon of Decarbonise Week, Virtual Sustainability Summit. A very simple title, but a huge issue, as I'm sure you're all well aware. I'm really excited that by first thing this morning, 165 people had registered for this, quite the best level of interest we've ever had in heat that I can remember. It shows what a growing issue it is in people's minds. I'm Judith Patton, Project Director and co-creator of All Energy and the co-located Dcarbonise. Creation in the last 18 months has not been of in-person events, but a compelling series of webinars, 30 between May 2020 and March of this year. Now here we go with Decarbonise Week. Just one tiny housekeeping point. Check out what lies behind the resources tabs. You can see what is up next, find a full program link, the digital bag, which is very difficult to say for some reason, and information on next May's All Energy and Decarbonise. It's 11th and 12th of May at Glasgow's SEC. Those are the dates for your diary. Naturally, we'd like to thank our sponsors. And for the first 3 days, these include our brand sponsors, ScottishPower, Shepherd and Wedderburn, and Orsted, whose names you'll see alongside certain sessions close to their hearts. And our session sponsors, Hitachi ABB Power Grids, Kellis Midstream, SSEN Transmission, and SWEP. If you do stay around and watch the short session that follows from SWEP, it will certainly be well worth watching. You'll be taking a drone flight with them through their district energy landscape. And the final sponsor is Driving the Electric Revolution Industrialization Centres. And thank you for being with us today, speakers, and all of you in the audience. If you enjoy the session, let us know, and also let your colleagues know that they can watch on demand. Now, you may well be wondering where our chair is. I'm afraid there have been some technical hitches, and Ragne, head of Heat Strategy Unit at the Scottish Government, is with us as a voice rather than you being able to see her. So, Ragne, I'd like to pass over to you now, please.
Thank you, Judith. Yes, and apologies, everybody, for the disembodied voice. Some of you I might have met before, but I am having technical difficulties, so joining by phone. Welcome, everybody. It's fantastic to be here and to be chairing something that's so close to my heart in terms of my professional role and so important in terms of Scotland and indeed global decarbonisation to meet our climate objectives in this very important year of COP26. We've got a great panel. I'll introduce them very briefly now and then give you a few introductory remarks before I hand on to our first speaker. We've got Chris Carberry, who's Smart Solutions Director at ScottishPower, Nick Gosling, who's Chief Strategy Officer at Vital Energy, Craig McCafferty, Project Director for the H100 project for SGN, and David Townsend, founder and MD of TownRock Energy. So we'll be passing to Chris in a minute. Luckily, I didn't have any slides prepared anyway, so you're not going to have to hear me struggle through those on the phone. But I did want to just highlight a few key things that I think help set the scene in terms of policy in Scotland on heat decarbonisation. Many of you will be aware that we published in February our draft heat and buildings strategy, which set out a vision for how we will decarbonise our homes and buildings, looking out to 2045 and our net zero targets, but most importantly, looking out over the next decade, 2030, where we need, in order to meet our statutory climate change objectives, our targets, we need to decarbonise buildings from a baseline of 2020 by 68%. So that's a 68% emissions reduction between 2020 and 2030, which is really challenging. That's very obvious, unprecedented, and the scale of acceleration and of intervention in homes and buildings right across Scotland is something I don't think any of us have really seen before. We're very used to, I think now, the sort of narrative around decarbonising electricity, that in some senses has been done without people noticing. The heat transition is very different. It will involve us improving the energy efficiency of our homes and buildings, and also changing the heat supply from one that currently is 80% based on fossil fuel consumption. So we've got a very ambitious set of targets. We've got a commitment to introduce regulation to help achieve those targets. We have a set of delivery schemes, and we've committed over this Parliament to invest at least 1.8 billion in energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation across Scotland's homes and buildings. That will only get us so far. We know that we need to do more, and we'll need to leverage private investment and indeed people's own willingness to adopt new technologies and to make their homes greener and cleaner and easier to heat. So it will require effort from right across society. So I shall stop there and hand over to Chris, who's going to talk to us from ScottishPower.
Okay, thanks, Ragne. Much appreciated. And hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be able to attend this conference today, even if only virtually. And it's great for ScottishPower to be a partner and a sponsor for this event. So my name is Chris Carberry, and today I'm going to talk to you mainly about the transition away from gas to a home fully serviced by renewable electricity alone. I'm going to talk through some of the myths and tackle some of the legitimate challenges for us all. But my intention really is to leave you all optimistic that we can do things now that will make a lasting difference. However, we absolutely need to recognise that there will be no net zero while we continue to burn natural gas for heat or for electricity generation, so alternatives are essential. So why do we need to decarbonise? So I don't think any of us can escape the changes that we can see in our own lives and on the news about the increasing extremes that we see in weather and climate. You know, the world in which my children and future grandchildren will live in will be hugely adversely impacted by the unknowing actions of previous generations. However, we are the generation that for the first time know the harm that we're doing when we emit carbon into the atmosphere. So we are the ones that must do something about it, and as soon as possible. I don't hide from the fact that ScottishPower has contributed to global warming when we burned coal and gas to generate electricity. But with the knowledge that we now have, we made a fundamental change. So ScottishPower is a leader in renewable energy generation, and we no longer burn coal, gas, or anything else to generate electricity. I'm really proud to work for an organisation that genuinely seeks to make a positive difference in the world, and I hope that I can in some way help deliver some of that change. It's not just in my work life I need to examine, I need to look at what I do, what I contribute as an individual. Amongst my biggest contributions to global warming and carbon is my gas boiler, which I use to heat my home with my water and my radiators. A recent study found that collectively we produce twice as much CO2 from burning gas in our homes than we do from burning gas to generate electricity. So while we look to zero carbon generation, we also need to look to take the carbon out of our homes. So what's the answer? Well, for most of us, it's going to be heat pumps. An air source heat pump running on renewable power will comfortably heat a home without any carbon emissions, and compared to a gas boiler, offers more comfort. The constant temperature control avoids that intermittent blast you get from a gas boiler, meaning radiators tend not to swing from too hot to touch to off. A heat pump is situated outdoors and frees up space in the home where the boiler currently resides, and makes a carbon monoxide that I have in the home just now completely redundant. You know, this isn't a thing for the future. This is a solution that's available today, and we can use heat pumps to replace carbon-producing gas boilers. So why are we not introducing them in higher numbers today? Well, there are three main reasons. First, a heat pump is more expensive to fit than a gas boiler today. The costs of running a heat pump are not always cheaper than a gas boiler. And as a society, we are just used to gas-fired heating systems, and this is just new and different. So I'm going to take each of those kind of barriers in turn. So why are heat pumps more expensive to fit? Well, despite our likely assumption that they're more expensive than boilers themselves, actually the hardware is only a little bit more expensive and is likely to come down in price significantly as we install more of them. The main reason it's more expensive to fit is because we need to convert our home that's been designed for gas heating into a more efficient format. So this includes an initial survey and then changing the radiators, the location and the type of radiators, upgrading the insulation and then removing the boiler. The cost for this retrofit activity will come down over time. In fact, it's my mission to make that process as efficient as possible. But for the 20% of homes that we'll have in 2050 that are not yet built, we've got the opportunity now to design a zero carbon house. I welcome the legislation that means from 2025, house builders will no longer connect to gas networks, but will instead have an electric only heating solution. Second barrier of running costs. Although the heat pump is a more efficient use of energy, and today, at the time of writing, prices are a bit crazy, but electricity costs about 20 pence a kilowatt hour, and gas costs around about 5 pence. So why is electricity so much more expensive than gas? Well, the main reason is the levies applied by the UK government. A quarter, 25% of your electricity tariff is for environmental and social obligation costs. So this includes subsidising growth of renewable energy, as well as other worthy social benefits such as the warm home discount. However, only 2% of your gas tariff has government levies, despite that being the polluting fuel that we need to replace. Inflating the electricity bill for everyone to then discount people's bills who are using gas to heat their homes doesn't make any sense. We need to flip that around. So the same amount of funds are actually raised, but it's more balanced towards gas. This will create the right incentives to move away from gas and adopt solutions such as a heat pump. ScottishPower supports the rebalancing of environmental and social obligation costs between gas and electricity, and hope the UK government also support this among their strategy for heating and buildings. I recognise it's not an easy thing to do, especially for the politicians, because there'll be winners and losers, but I believe that actually there's a way forward that can support anyone with a higher energy bill, and for most of us, we'll see very little difference in our dual-fuel bills. And the third barrier is just change. So, humans are wary of change. Change represents threat, but actually without change, there's no evolution or progress. We urgently need to stop using gas to heat our homes, so change is needed. But widespread adoption of this view is not easy and will take time in reality. Fear of change is probably underpinning some of those unfounded claims you hear about heat pumps, such as they'll stop working when it's cold outside, but they won't. I know from personal experience, when it's cold outside, a lot of gas boilers break down. The cost won't come down. The cost will definitely come down, but a kickstart is needed to drive them down quicker. And heat pumps are noisy. They're about 40 to 60 decibels if you're stood within a metre of them, but pretty much zero when you're inside the house. Change can be achieved, however, if we incentivise the right behaviours to adopt low carbon technologies. Once enough of us are using them and sharing positive experiences, they just become normal and eventually preferred. You can see this already in the electric car market, where R&D, through legislation change, more R&D went into electric cars, so we get more better, affordable cars. And now we're at the point where actually demand is outstripping supply. I think for the vast majority of us, we will consider an EV when we buy our next car. This too can be the outcome for heat pumps. We just need the right legislation to support the rollout, and companies like mine design better and more affordable heating solutions. ScottishPower supports grants to reduce the initial cost of retrofitting a heat pump, but we also support funding given directly to local authorities and social landlords to upgrade social housing. People living in social housing are likely to be the least able to afford the switch, and rather than just leaving them to the end, we can put them at the front and kickstart real scale to the heat and pump retrofit market and reduce costs quicker. In fact, it's heartening to see at this point made clear in the Scottish Government's future plans. So air source heat pumps have a huge part to play in displacing boilers for retrofitting existing homes and new builds. However, new developments in particular will also have the option of ground source heating. This offers even lower running costs, as the fluid used in the system is naturally warmed by the earth and takes less electricity to heat it up. And the upfront cost of these networks don't have to be borne out by the house builder, because companies such as ScottishPower will build and maintain it over a period of time and then collect the running costs through factors fees for private homes or through the Housing Association for social housing. Heat pumps will be the answer for the majority of us, but should not be seen as a panacea. There will be other solutions that will be developed over time. But at the core of them, there must be that they do not emit carbon and they work for the people living in those homes. We must do this to achieve net zero. We must do this to avoid what we can for future climate change. However, we can't all do it alone. We all need to play our part. Governments need to support with the right legislation and financial stimulus. Organisations like ScottishPower need to lead by developing the right solutions and making them easy to adopt and affordable. Most of all, we need the public to want the change. It's too difficult to sell something that people don't want or need. Successful organisations deliver things that the public want and value, and I truly believe that the public value the future of our planet and the lives of future generations. At some point, we will all live in homes that are efficient and running on net zero electricity. The speed in which we achieve this will be down to our collective will and priority. And on my part, I'm going to do what I can, working with others, to help deliver a better future quicker. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. I think I am now going to hand over to Nick, who I'm struggling to see.
Yeah.
I'm hoping he's ready. Yes, Nick from Vital Energy, thank you.
Already, thanks, Ragne. I don't know if you can see my slides. Are they on the screen? Can anyone see the slides? Yeah, great. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. Really useful starting discussion from Chris, and hopefully I'll agree with many of the words he said, but perhaps add some different perspectives as well. The process of decarbonisation has got a lot of complexity, but if you break it back to its very raw principles, and you take a simple example, like I've put on the slide, a residential gas boiler that converts natural gas through a boiler to hot water and provides heat to radiators. The process of decarbonising that really starts from the right-hand side, the use backwards. So 1 and 2 are about improving the efficiency of the building, installing better controls, then improving the insulation, allowing the temperature of distribution to be reduced, and then potentially installing a heat pump, as Chris talked about, and converting the high fossil fuel to a low carbon and hopefully soon zero carbon technology of electricity. So if it's that simple, why isn't everyone doing it? So this builds on some of the themes that Chris has already talked about. There is clearly people want to do the right thing, but there really isn't a hard imperative for decarbonisation. The policy landscape is confusing and the timescales are not clear, and it's not certain for developers or homeowners what technologies they should choose. As Chris has mentioned, a lot of low carbon technologies are more expensive to buy and potentially have higher operating costs than high fossil solutions. There are a range of technologies available, heat pumps of course, but heat networks, electric heaters potentially all have their role. What's also important is that different users need different forms of energy. So in particular, industrial processes often need much higher temperatures than heat pumps can easily achieve. There is therefore a need for multiple pathways to decarbonisation, and electricity will clearly be part of that, but so will also the rest of the technologies that I've shown, hydrogen, biomass, and potentially some limited use of fossil fuel, but along with carbon capture and storage. Now, each of those pathways has its challenges and will inevitably rely on support mechanisms. So what are some of the policies that we feel are needed in order to encourage the transition to low carbon? I think it would be really helpful to have clear timescales in which natural gas boilers can cease to be installed. And that applies both for new build and for retrofit. I think a really key point would be having a clear understanding of the trajectory of carbon pricing up to 2050. If we all knew that every couple of years the cost of carbon was going to increase by a significant amount, it would encourage us all to make the right economic decision. Scottish Government policy already has a clear indication towards the zoning policy, which I think is very important, making it clear for users what is deemed to be the most suitable form of decarbonisation in certain parts of towns and cities. Mandated building connections would be great, but I appreciate that comes with a lot of political challenge. There are geographical differences around the country. So we're dealing with projects from Scotland down to the south of the UK, and different policies within different local authorities and different governments makes it quite complicated to find a solution that works for all geographies. Gas-fired CHP has been a great technology to encourage the transition to low carbon. It's all obviously understood that it uses a fossil fuel, but it's still a key economic technology to drive the transition, particularly for district heating networks. So if CHPs run in the right way, we believe that it still has a role for, not the long term, but the short term future. Leveling the playing field around business rates. Chris has talked about reallocation of policy costs, so I won't go there again. But I think finally on my wish list is a form of encouragement through either a waste heat or a low carbon heat incentive to replace the renewable heat incentive, which did a lot to encourage the heat network sector. I won't go through all the details, but the project on the slide is a water source heat pump project that we've designed and built for Western Bartonshire Council on the River Clyde in Clydebank. And it will, when it's fully built, it will connect to over 1,200 homes, along with local authority buildings, healthcare facilities, etc. This project would not have happened without the critical support from Scottish Government's low carbon infrastructure transition programme, and also from the UK Government's renewable heat incentive. So without these low carbon projects often can't happen. So our urge to government will be to try and find policies that support the transition to low carbon. So that's it from me. Thanks all for listening. I think I'm now passing over to Craig McCafferty. So over to you, Craig.
Thanks, Nick. So good afternoon. My name is Craig McCafferty. I'm the project director for SGN's Fife H100 project. Revolutionary new application of hydrogen for heating in the homes, uniquely using green energy. So an end-to-end example of hydrogen for heat. Hopefully you can see my screen. Okay, so before I talk about the project itself, just a couple of quick words about SGN. So SGN are one of 4 gas network distribution companies operating across the UK. Our area, as you can see from the map, is Scotland, the south of England, including London and Northern Ireland. And the infrastructure that we operate serves around 14 million customers currently, providing energy and heating providing energy for heating and for cooking. Now, the fact that around 18% of new connections annually fall into the bracket of fuel poor customers, that highlights the challenge of the just transition that both Nick and Chris touched on. And I do envy the politicians in addressing this most difficult of challenge. But obviously, as we look at those new net zero heating solutions, we need to find ways to minimize the system cost overall. And critically, we need to understand how we can fund that change without excessive impact on the end consumer. So in summary on this chart, what you can see is there's significant infrastructure already in place to transfer energy across the country. And our challenge is how can we leverage that infrastructure to provide our part in the journey to zero carbon energy for domestic heating. So the Fife H100 project itself will be situated in the area of Leavenmouth in Fife, bordering Buckhaven and Methil. It's going to utilise green electricity from an existing 7 megawatt wind turbine, and that electricity will power a twin electrolyser train to produce hydrogen that will then supply initially 300 homes with zero carbon energy. The facility will include hydrogen storage as well to maintain security of supply and to mitigate, of course, the intermittent nature of wind power. Importantly, this is a voluntary trial. It's an opt-in trial, and local residents will be invited to the demonstration facility on the site, showcasing the hydrogen-compatible appliances. Those are, of course, boilers, cookers, and domestic fires. And this was a key objective for the trial. We need to understand the consumer appetite for hydrogen in a real-world demonstration. So this project, just as Nick said, with the Queen's Quay project, received significant funding from both the UK government via Ofgem and the Scottish government, for which we're very grateful. Procurement is underway. Construction will last through 2022. And ultimately, we will begin delivering zero carbon hydrogen to customers in early 2023. So this is phase one of the H100 suite of projects, and it forms part of the UK government's 10-point plan. It's referred to in the 10-point plan as the hydrogen neighbourhood trial. In the 10-point plan, the government's objective is to progress through a hydrogen neighbourhood to a hydrogen village, supplying 1,000 to 2,000 homes, and then onwards beyond into a hydrogen town, supplying up to 10,000 homes, but also into the realms of industrial and commercial and transportation links. So finally, clearly the path to net zero is complex and extremely challenging. The H100 Fife trial provides an opportunity to inform those difficult heat policy decisions with real-world experience, incorporating not only the technical and regulatory aspects, but also social attitudes and consumer choice. It's an important evidentiary stepping stone on the path to a future hydrogen economy. So that concludes my whistle-stop introduction to the Fife H100 project. I look forward to the panel discussion that will follow shortly. But before that, I think I now pass the baton on to David Townsend, founder and managing director of TownRock Energy. And I think David is also joined by his cat.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Fortunately, my cat just decided to go and entertain himself, so I won't be quite as distracted. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we've got them, David.
You've got them. Great. Cool. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Those are three really interesting talks. So I'm David Townsend. I'm the founder and managing director at TownRock Energi. We're a geothermal energy consultancy based in Edinburgh and Aberdeen. We established in Aberdeen in 2013, and our mission is to use all of the geology beneath ourselves for renewable heating, and then in some cases for power generation, but also for renewable cooling and thermal storage. Interestingly, on the first talk, I have to be that guy. My flat has an electric boiler, and it's actually direct electric to a wet heating system, and I have the option to switch to gas. And when I got the flat, I thought I would, and I never had, because it's very effective and it's cost the same as to run as my neighbors do who are running gas. So I think the switch to electric can be quite simple from a personal perspective. So this slide shows you two images. So on the right-hand side, we have a map of the UK, and the temperature gradient there is for 1 kilometer depth. So you can just see from that map that there is a lot of heat in the ground, and it is actually quite variable geographically. Now, I'll come back to the map, but I'd like to draw your attention to the diagram on the left, which shows the different types of geothermal resource or system design that are available in the UK. And if you wish, we have a menu of options which can provide any type of or any form of energy at different scales all across the UK, depending on what the customer might require. So on the far left are the most simple and widely used type of geothermal is a ground source heat pump. This is when you have usually boreholes with pipes installed in them down to up to about 200 meters, and that extracts heat from the bedrock, and it actually, the source of that heat is actually mostly solar energy that gets charged up in that very shallow portion of the earth. That type of system is also used for cooling, and quite often used for seasonal heating and cooling. So you can essentially charge the boreholes up in the summer when you're providing cooling to the space that needs that in the summer. We are actually developing a project in Glasgow right now with a nightclub where we're using that concept, but on a daily and weekly scale, so that when lots of cooling is required in the event space, we charge up the boreholes as a thermal battery. And then the next day when we need heating, we take that heat back out again and use it, essentially converting the customers into the source of renewable heating. It's called the Body Heat Project, and also supported by the LCITP from Scottish Government, and we're very grateful for that. The next technology along is a mine water heat pump. This is where all of the flooded coal mines across the UK, when they closed, have the water has filled all the caverns up, and it's warmed up because of the natural geothermal energy of the earth. And these types of systems look to use that water for heating and for cooling. We're currently providing some sort of optimization and improvement and maintenance services to the biggest scheme in the UK, which is in Newcastle and owned by a very progressive wine company for heating a number of their warehouses. As we go deeper and further to the right, there's what's called a hot sedimentary aquifer, which is essentially an aquifer, a rock with water in it, that in generally would be looking at deeper than 500 meters for this type of source. And depending on the type of geology and also the type of heat demand that you need, you will go deeper or shallower to develop that type of system. You can also recycle an old oil well into that type of system as well, and avoid the upfront drilling costs required. Then on the right hand side, we have a deep geothermal project, which is targeting a granite, usually between 5 and 7 kilometers down. And there's 2 of these projects in Cornwall. One is already built and one is in the process of drilling right now. And they can then generate power and have a lot of heat provision as well. So these technologies, especially on the deeper end of the spectrum, are poised to become a replacement for gas CHP, whereby heat networks are required to decarbonize beyond gas CHP, and can also be used for industrial processes where high temperature steam is required. And all of these have the capacity to be net zero if the source of electricity for running the pumps and or the heat pumps is a renewable electricity source. So if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to get in touch. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, David. Hopefully people can hear me again. That's great. That was a really good, I think, exposition of the complexity and the multiple dimensions of the heat decarbonisation challenge, the variety of different technologies and approaches and projects that are already out there and that we need to deploy to get us to where we need to get to. And that's, I think, Nick's point about sort of multiple pathways is very much where we are at the moment, and providing greater clarity and really drilling down into what is appropriate for each individual building, thinking through the system costs and everything in between is where we need to be going next, I think, and we're doing a lot of work on that. So it's really great to hear all of those presentations, and I know there's some questions been coming through already. One from me first, as chair's prerogative, which is, I wonder if each of you had a magic wand and you had one thing you could do, what's the most important thing you think to do to remove the barriers to decarbonising heat? And I'll maybe just start at the beginning and go to Chris first.
I think, well, magic wands, would I start with heat? I don't know, but certainly what I outlined in my speech in terms of the price barriers, I think people, if it was more cost reflective of using gas and then using the electricity, and if that cost also took into account the cost of the environment, then I think that the kind of switch from gas to renewable electricity would be all the more easier. So I think there's traction moving in that direction, but certainly that would be one significant barrier that could be removed, would help a lot.
Great, thank you. Succinct, excellent. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, hopefully I'm not cheating by having a similar answer to Chris, but I think for me, the carbon pricing and having a clear trajectory for that up to 2050 would be really key. It's clear that governments are not going to be able to fund the whole of the transition to net zero, and by applying a cost of carbon to all people who generate carbon from consuming fossil fuels will be a clear indicator of the carbon that they are emitting and the cost they're causing to society and to their own pocket. So I think carrot and stick are needed in parallel, but this is perhaps more of a stick policy. But for me, it would be a carbon pricing that people have to pay for the carbon they emit. So that's my idea. Great.
Craig, have you got the same or a different magic wand?
If only I did have a magic wand. I'm going to cheat, Ragne, and actually ask for two favors, if you can, please. The first one, and fundamentally, this comes down to money. And I will leave it to the experts like Nick to describe policy decisions that can really unlock the funding challenge, but funding is clearly needed in very large quantities. But the second aspect, and I don't have the magic answer to this, is demand. I think we need to avoid pushing on the rope and create a pull on the rope. Somehow we need to get into the psyche of the general public and create a pull and a thirst for these technologies. And I fully agree with the comments that there is no silver bullet here, by the way. We need to back more than one horse in this race, but somehow we need to create significant public demand and address those fears of change that Chris alluded to as well.
Great, thank you. And David?
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with all of the comments made. So I'll try to pick a new magic wand out of the hat. And go for, again, I don't know the specific planning or policy kind of drivers for this, but it's essentially to roll out heat networks far more quickly and scale them up far more quickly in the same trajectory that countries like Denmark and Sweden and France have, whereby you pair a waste heat source with a heat demand initially, build a no-brainer of a heat network that suddenly turns a source of loss and waste into a source of revenue. And then when those heat networks reach a sufficient scale, you can start plugging in other heat sources and gradually making the whole system more and more low carbon. So that to me is a no-brainer. And yes, it requires a lot of infrastructure investment, but we don't seem shy of that right now with regards to what's going on in government expenditure elsewhere. So let's overcome those planning and land ownership and heat commercialization issues quickly and just get on with building lots of heat networks.
Great, thank you. Good selection of similar but not exactly the same thoughts there, lots to chew over. There's a few questions about hydrogen, not all of which are just for Craig, I think. I'll try and kind of group them together. So there's one around prospects for 100% green hydrogen in the gas network. So that's maybe one that Craig might want to pick up. But also other questions about investment in hydrogen and the role for hydrogen in the wider net zero economy, which I guess, I know ScottishPower have a hydrogen arm. Maybe Chris would like to come in on that also, but Nick too, I suppose. So just that first point about what the prospects are for 100% green hydrogen in the gas network. Maybe Craig, you could give some thoughts on that one.
Sure. It's a great question. And of course, the project I described is a pilot for 300 homes supplied with 100% hydrogen is a great example of the vision. But clearly, in order to supply the nation or the existing gas domestic heat network with hydrogen at that scale, it's going to require significant investment in hydrogen generation. And therefore we can probably not avoid the question of green hydrogen versus blue hydrogen. Clearly, nirvana, I would argue, is that we could very rapidly introduce electrolyzer type solutions to give us 100% green hydrogen. There's the supply and demand challenge to that. But also, I guess there's the challenge of the source of sufficient green electricity to drive that as well. And that's why I think, my personal opinion, we probably can't get to 100% hydrogen network without the likes of the Acorn project and other solutions to store CO2 derived from natural gas reformation.
Chris, do you want to come in on general questions around the role for hydrogen?
Yeah, so probably just to provide a slightly different view on green hydrogen. So from a ScottishPower perspective, we're very much of the view that the primary solution is renewable electricity. Right? You can generate electricity with no carbon and then get that to people's homes and businesses, and they can use that to power what they need. Then that's the best solution. And right now we've got some gaps where we can't do that. So for example, the ferries between mainland and our islands, we don't have an electric solution for that just now. So we look to green hydrogen as a way of converting that renewable electricity into another form, so that we can then transport it and then use it in that area. So that's fine for just now, while we still look for an electric solution. We can look at long haulage is another example of that just now. But I've got companies that are approaching us who think they've got a solution to that, or they're a few years away from having a solution to that. So that's one from a hydrogen point of view we look at and say, yeah, there looks like a need for it just now, but we might not be there in 5 or 10 years' time. So that's definitely the view of hydrogen, and that hydrogen has to be green. So that means zero carbon hydrogen, exactly the kind of diagram that Craig showed earlier, where we take it from a wind farm or even a solar farm, and then we use that renewable electricity to then electrolyse, create the hydrogen, and then transport. We use just around about 500 terawatt hours worth of natural gas a year through the gas network. And right now we've got just under 11,000 wind turbines in the UK. To have enough wind turbines to power that amount of natural gas for the network, we would need 10 times more wind turbines. We would need 110,000 more wind turbines just to replace natural gas. So, honestly, there's not enough space in the UK. There's not enough space offshore, even to do that. And the other question is, why would you do that? Would you not better just rather put it straight into an electric solution and then power it that way? That way you have no losses, you've got no conversion in doing that. And I can understand, different companies having different propositions, but realistically, and I don't think there's one solution to this. I said in my speech as well. So it's not to say that green hydrogen and hydrogen doesn't have necessarily a place in it just now, but I think if we know that it's not going to work, then let's go and invest in other solutions just now. So I think for me, it's very much, we should be using renewable, we should be building renewables, we should be using that renewables to then, decarbonise the bits that electricity can't decarbonise for now.
Great, thanks. Nick and David, do either of you want to come in on this one? And then I've got quite a different question next.
Yeah, I'll add in a few thoughts. I think I tend to agree with the previous speakers that hydrogen clearly has a role, but there isn't enough, or there couldn't be enough capacity in offshore wind to make all of the hydrogen that's needed in the UK from green hydrogen. However, hydrogen does have a really important role for sectors that are hard to decarbonise. So industrials that use high temperatures, like steel making, glass making, etc. Hydrogen has an important potential role in there. For the residential sector, there are other technologies that are likely to be cheaper and easier to implement. But a key point that I would like to make is that district heating networks are technology agnostic. So over the next 60 to 100 years, a heat network may well initially start life with gas-fired CHP being its prime source of energy, but that could then be converted to an electric heat pump or hydrogen boilers or hydrogen fuel cell or geothermal energy. So district heating isn't actually competing with these other technologies. It's providing the key infrastructure that allows those technologies to get heat to customers. So we really don't have any particular technology that we favour more than another. I think we recognise that each has an important role to play. So hand over to David.
I'll keep my comment very, very brief because I know we want to move on to another question. I completely agree with what's been said. I think there's an important role for hydrogen. I mean, where you have curtailed onshore wind, build a fuel cell there and start generating, or an electrolyzer, sorry, and start generating hydrogen with that curtailed wind. And then use that for really hard to decarbonize spaces like transport or industrial processing. Really, really sensible thing to do with hydrogen. I don't think there's any role for hydrogen in domestic space heating, purely from an efficiency perspective. If the source is renewable electricity, if you put that through a heat pump, you get a 300 to 400% efficiency. If you put that through a direct electric boiler, you get 100% efficiency. If you convert that to hydrogen and then burn that, you get, is it about a 15 to 20% efficiency? So you're wasting an enormous amount of renewable electricity by going through those steps. So,
thanks, David. I'll allow others to come back on any of those points in their further comments, rather than do another round. So there may be a bit back and forth on some of these points. But I've got quite a different clutch of questions that have come in, which are really about the impact on people. So the disruption potentially of installing these various technologies in people's homes, the engagement that's needed with the public, and also the potential impact of, for example, carbon pricing on the fuel poor or on the wider heat transition in terms of people's bills. So I might start, just to mix it up a little bit, start with Craig on sort of disruption to people's lives and how the impact of cost can be borne.
Again, I think it's a really, really important question, particularly if you think of the challenge as I described it, as a piece of rope, and if we're trying to push solutions on customers who don't want that change or who are frightened of that disruption, clearly there's a lot of engagement required regardless of the technology. I was in a discussion just a couple of weeks ago with the boiler manufacturers who are working with us for the Fife H100 project, and it's really encouraging to hear that their design of boilers and the hydrogen ready boilers that that should be beginning to be installed in 2023 for this project. At the point of transition from natural gas to hydrogen, that changeover takes less than an hour, and it's just a handful of components, 2 or 3 components within the boiler required to be changed out. So that's a very painless transition itself inside the domestic home. And I think we do need to understand and compare that level of disruption with some of the requirements that Chris talked about earlier for radiator changes, for re-insulating houses. Obviously, if we're into the sphere of ground source heat pump as well, then the disruption externally as well. These are not easy sells to the public, and although the technology may be more beautiful and the technology may have efficiency advantages, if we can't create that pull from homeowners and tenants, then we're going to struggle here.
Thanks. Nick, I'll invite you to come in on this.
Yeah, thank you. It is a difficult one to answer this, because there's both a capital implication, and as Craig just mentioned, converting a natural gas boiler to hydrogen is very simple, quick and painless. But then if they have to pay 4 times the amount for their gas with hydrogen compared to natural gas, then they feel the pain through their annual or monthly bills rather than the capital. So it really needs to be taken as a life cycle view, and clearly by introducing a carbon tax, there is a potential unintended consequence of that, of leaving the people who can't afford to convert to paying higher bills because they're on a high carbon fuel. But that potentially is because they're in property that is not suited to a low carbon future. So if they're in a social housing or housing association organisation, then you would hope that they would be supported by schemes like the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund that government have launched. So, whatever policies are devised need to work for the whole population. And, it's very difficult in a 1-hour panel discussion to solve all the problems. If we can solve a third of them, we're doing well. So I'll pass over to the next.
Yeah, David, do you want to come in next, and then Chris?
Yeah, sure. So the capex versus opex question needs to be unpacked really further. I don't think we have a lot of time to do that. I think just coming back to one point Craig said, I think that the ease of adoption by the public is really, really important. And I would still say that a direct electric boiler will be as easy to convert as a gas boiler to a hydrogen boiler, which has 100% efficiency instead of 15 to 20 across the whole supply chain. For that scale, though, I think I want to talk more about what the local sort of community benefit might be and what the socioeconomic benefit might be. And in the case that we were to implement, blue hydrogen with carbon capture and storage on the scale that is required to supply the UK gas network with hydrogen, because we know there is not going to be enough wind, then it continues to allow for the large heat market to be monopolized by a few big energy super major players and be very much centralized. Whereas with other options, especially when you have local authority, part-owned or completely owned heat networks that allow for gradual connection to people that are otherwise suffering fuel poverty and are technology agnostic, you allow for the re-democratization of energy, so that money being spent by the community on heating and cooling their buildings can start to go to a local company or a local authority-owned company that can then be reinvested in the community. So it draws a smaller and smaller circle around the energy market that can benefit the people that use the energy the most.
Thanks. What I'm going to do now, because we're running short on time, is ask Chris to come in on that point, but also to offer you the opportunity, Chris, to just provide some sort of final closing comments based on the discussion we've had. and then I'll come to the others.
That's great, thanks. So I think we can't escape the problem we've got in the UK, which is, especially in comparison to others, we've got very poorly insulated homes across the piece. So, I said in my talk earlier, we have to want, the public have to want this. You can't impose it on them, they're going to have to want it. And in doing that, what is it that we're going to give them or help them get? And the first thing we need to do is to make sure that their homes are efficient, because it doesn't matter what technology you put in there, if you're wasting it or losing it and paying for that, especially, you see the kind of prices in the market just now, and that doesn't feel like it's necessarily a blip. That may be something we're living with for a period of time. So we need to make the homes more efficient. So I don't think there's an easy way of doing that. I think the easiest thing to do is to make sure all of our new homes are 100% ready for what is needed, and the building trade are doing that just now, but they're very much following regulations, so the regulations need to support that. The retrofit efficiency piece is the thing that says, well, how do I make that as easy as possible, right? So, I'm trying to set up a heat pump, installation part of ScottishPower just now. And, my mission is for customers to have, the quickest, easiest, cheapest, installation process, and for us to find the efficiencies in doing that. And the point I made earlier as well is that if we start with the local authorities and social housing, then those are the people that benefit the most from that experience. And then, that fuel poverty that we're seeing increasingly is a problem. We've got a price cap there trying to protect customers from that just now, but it's still an increasing problem. Whereas if you switch them onto a renewable heating source and the tariffs are properly managed in terms of those social obligation costs that are levied on them as well, then actually those people are going to get the most efficient homes first, and they're going to get the lowest bills first. And that seems to me a good way of helping getting the cost down, helping get the economies of scale, and making sure that people who are most likely to be adversely impacted get to them first before we can get to everybody else. So I think that for me is the way that I think we can try and make it easier, but I don't think we should pretend that it's always going to be easy, because we have a problem and we've got poorly insulated homes. So that's the answer to that question. Just in terms of summing up, just really quickly, I think thanks very much for kind of asking me to do this, and thanks to Chair and the fellow panelists. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think what I've probably got from this, and hopefully everybody's got from this, is there's no one answer, and it's not easy, but we need to do something, and we need to do it quickly. So that's a kind of perfect set of challenges to try and get on with, but get on with it, we absolutely must. I think what I see everywhere is good intent. I think I did a little bit about the need to decarbonise, but that feels less and less like something I need to kind of push on any kind of audience. I think that it's there and people want to do something about it. And overall, I think we as individuals and society are more increasingly willing to invest in it, to pay for it. But it's not a bottomless pit. We absolutely need to do what we need to do to make it efficient and low cost, but also quick. So I look forward to what we do collectively and individually over the coming weeks and months and years, and it'll be interesting to see what we're pontificating now, how that kind of turns out in years to come. But it does feel like we've got the menu of solutions in front of us just now that could work in the kind of medium to long term.
Great, thanks, Chris. I think if Nick, Craig, and David could each give us 20 seconds of just concluding thoughts. Is that okay? That would be great.
Yeah. Do you want
in
me
that
to
order?
start?
So Nick. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So like Craig said, I've found the discussions very interesting from the other panelists, and I hope the people who are listening in feel that they've got something out of the session. There clearly is no single silver bullet, so everything we're doing is good, even though we might some days compete with each other. I think the answer is all of the above need to happen. We need heat networks, we need geothermal, we need hydrogen, we need electrification, we need more grid reinforcement. So let's all go out and do it, guys. So thanks everyone for your time.
Great. Craig?
Yeah, I think after spending 20-something years in big energy as an engineer, very comfortable in my little sphere of technical problems and clear solutions, I'm learning in this new role that this is not a problem that's going to be solved by engineers alone, nor is it a problem that's going to be solved by engineers plus politicians. It's much, much broader than that and much more challenging. And therefore, I think the support that we need and the support that we're getting from governments to identify and accelerate those programs that can demonstrate solutions both from a scientific and social and economic perspective is really key, and the way that we're going to unlock this problem.
Great, thank you. David, I hope we've still got a few seconds left.
Yeah, well, just thank you very much to the other panelists. Really good discussion. I completely agree. There is not one solution. They all need to be tried and tested in lots of different situations. And I'm extremely inspired by the fact that right now we're having this conversation and everybody is really on board with this, that it's a matter of trying everything out as opposed to, well, do we need to do it now or not? We're definitely there and we definitely need to do it now. Thank you very much to Decarbonise and Judith Path and the organizers of this for creating this platform for so many years to have this kind of debate. I think it's extremely valuable. And then just finally, thanks for having me. And if there are any, especially large commercial, industrial or public sector energy users out there that aren't sure what to do, just remember that for renewable heat, look beneath your feet. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to Judith and the team for bearing with me with my tech challenges. It's been a really rich conversation, and I think I certainly have learnt lots. So I hope everybody else has as well. This is a massive collective endeavour that we're embarking on, but it's great to hear that there's so much enthusiasm and energy and creativity going into that. So it's been really enjoyable. Thank you all very much indeed. And I think that's us finished. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you, Ragne.
Bye.